I'm Mark Neslin. I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Strategy for GreenPower Motor Company, and very happy to have each of you with us here today. Before we get into the project itself, I just want to go quickly over the two vehicles that were piloted, the GreenPower Beast and Nano Beast. Of course, the Type D Beast seats up to 90 passengers. In all cases on the pilot project, the buses were configured for 84 passengers during that process. It, of course, is a heavy-duty Class 8, and it does have dual-port charging. So it does both a Level 2 and a DC fast charge. As we talk about the results of the pilot, we should know that in the case of the pilot, we did not use DC fast chargers. We used all Level 2 slow charges, and so that will be something we talk about as we get into the data. The Type A Nano Beast, when this was deployed during the pilot project back in October, at that time this was the first purpose-built all-electric Type A that had been deployed anywhere in the United States with a rear curbside lift and wheelchair securement. So it was really piloting the new product on the market as it went through the counties in West Virginia. And this particular vehicle does seat up to 24 passengers without the securements, but in the case of the pilot project, it was configured for 14 passengers with the curbside lift and with the wheelchair securements. It also can charge both Level 2 and fast charge. It can also do wireless charging. Again, in the case of the pilot project, on this vehicle, we were using all slow charge from that perspective. Here's some of the statistics of how the project was implemented. There was 18 counties that piloted these buses during that period of time. So that is basically 1/3 of the school districts in the state of West Virginia piloted these buses over that time. It went on for 9 months. They drove more than 32,000 miles. There were more than 100 professional school bus drivers in those 18 counties that drove these buses. Some of them drove the bus for a week. Some, in a couple of cases, they put one driver on the bus the whole time. Some might have drove them a day or two. It was completely up to the school district on the routes that the bus was put on, and it was completely up to the school district on which of their drivers participated in the driving. So in ideal conditions, when there wasn't real cold weather and the heaters didn't have to run a lot, and the drivers drove the way they should drive, and you were on good roads, we saw basically a 1.4 to a 1.5 range, meaning 1.4 to 1.5 miles per 1% state of charge. That means 140 to 150 miles. When you got an aggressive heater usage in January and February, you saw that go to a 0.6 or a 0.7. So you saw that drop to a 60 or 70 miles on a full state of charge. We saw, 0.7 to 0.8, 70 to 80. We saw as low as a 0.69. It tells you that heat, as we all know, is the biggest enemy to range on an electric vehicle. And you can easily see in the data that aggressive use of heat reduced the range by, in some cases, more than 30%. I would tell you that the data clearly shows that, of course, air conditioning did not have a significant impact on range. And again, we know that. Air conditioning doesn't affect range like heating does. Heating takes energy, air conditioning doesn't take the energy. The other thing the data clearly showed was the mountainous terrain did not significantly impact the range. Now, in your mind, you're going to think for a minute, why is that? That doesn't make any sense. Well, when you go up a hill, you also come down a hill. And so when you come down that hill, your regenerative braking is putting energy back into that battery. And the last thing to remember is that drivers' habits and everything affects all of this, and how people drive affects this just like it does in a gas mileage on your car. And so those have an impact as well. The charging infrastructure that was used on this pilot was all level 2 chargers. There were 3 different brands of chargers used during the period. There was a Clipper Creek, a Nuvi, and in one case we had a Francis Energy. And one of the trials used some highly advanced reporting software. And I will tell you that that was significantly important because in some of our pilots, at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning, people were showing up to buses that might not have charged overnight. It might have not have charged overnight because the driver didn't get plugged in right. It might not have charged because there was some kind of a power surge that knocked the power off at the bus garage, or a number of other factors. If you show up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you've deployed 50% of your fleet into electric, and all of a sudden those buses didn't charge overnight, you've got a problem at 5 o'clock in the morning when it's time to go to school. And that reporting software took that situation out of the management from the charging side of things, to where this was in Lewis County that we did this, to where they were getting notifications that there had been power surges that had caused issues with the charging before they even know they had power surges at the facility. And while the charger was still charging when those notifications were happening, they were getting those notifications to recycle so that they wouldn't have a problem long term. And so, again, a takeaway from this when it came to charging was the importance of the software reporting that was used. The other thing that was very important in the actual charging of the vehicle was proper power supply at the facility. And while in most cases in West Virginia, they don't have phase 3 power that's going to be able to just hook up tomorrow a DC fast charge, that's not what I'm referring to here. What I'm referring to here is when a bus garage thinks they've got 240 coming into their facility, but it's really only 202 or less, and they think it's 240. And when you do that, you're changing the way that bus charges, you're changing the amount of kilowatts that you're getting in the vehicle. And so as you go through, it's important that you have to know what that power supply coming into a building is. And actually, it takes us to the bottom. What we found was in some cases a level 2 charging in the implementation of these buses was adequate. And it was adequate because that's all that was necessary for that vehicle to run the route that it did. It was a 30-mile route in town. It was a 40-mile route in town. They came back at 75%. There was no big deal. They really didn't even have to charge during the day. They could run the AM route. They could run the PM route, slow charge it overnight when charging rates were lower, and everything was great. But there were other cases where that was not adequate. There was cases where it came back in at 30% after the morning route because they were running the heater full bore and they couldn't run the bus in the afternoon. Because with a DC fast charge, even with with a level 2 slow charge, even with the daytime opportunity charging, they couldn't get the bus charged back enough to run in the afternoon, even though they weren't running heat in the afternoon because the weather had warmed by afternoon. So as you look at this charging infrastructure, and I think some of you were probably in this last session, what we know is the charging infrastructure is our Achilles heel. The bus did what the bus was supposed to do, and it didn't matter where we put the bus. The bus did its job. The issue was charging the bus. And how do we charge the bus so it has enough energy to take the kids to school in the morning and get them home safe at night, and maybe go to a football game in the afternoon, because we had football game runs and things like that during the pilot as well. So clearly, I think what this showed us as we go to consideration of long-term scenario is we have to look at a combination of DC fast charge and slow charges, depending on what that school district is doing, so that that bus can perform in the manner and run the route that that school district wants it to be on. And I think that that is a significant finding in this, because some people will tell you have to use all DC fast charge, other people will tell you can get by with all slow charge, and the facts and the data in this case showed neither of those are correct. It's somewhere in the middle depending on your individual situation at your school. We're working with an infrastructure provider now on 9 of those school districts going into the future that were in the pilot so they can make those determinations. And as you're looking to deploy those buses, however you're going to deploy them, know that you've got to do that early on. You've got to work with that power company. You've got to work with the infrastructure knowledge to be able to get that done. That's what the data really, really showed us in that sense. Students loved it. I will tell you that kids asked for it back when they would lose it. They liked the quiet. They liked not smelling the fumes. I had one situation in Wyoming County where they had a very violent disabled individual. He had to have 2 aides on the bus. He had threatened to kill the driver. I mean, you had a very significant situation here. And the quiet ride on the bus soothed this young man to the point that he had become less of a problem on the bus, to the point that they were scared what was going to happen when they put him back on the diesel bus from him getting used to riding in that electric bus. So the students enjoyed the bus, and we all know that we all talk about that this has the cost-saving side of it, and we always just all talk about national averages, 70 to 80%, and blah, 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 and we've got 150 less moving parts and this and that. But I had one of the school districts that had that bus hooked up to a dedicated meter, and the cost to charge that bus for 1 month was $200. The diesel fuel on that vehicle for a month, not additives, nothing else, just purely the cost of the diesel fuel, is $900. They calculated on the diesel fuel savings alone, down that one bus for that school district was $136,000 in savings on over 10 years, just from diesel fuel to the electric. I'm going to ask Delegate Toney to speak a little bit now about why the state wanted to implement this pilot project and why this was important to the state of West Virginia. Delegate Toney?
So we decided to do a pilot program. We needed to make sure that the counties knew what they were getting when they were going to buy it. You know, there's a lot of money to spend on a bus. You wanted to make sure it was going to work for us. Not only for us, but for the nation. If it can work in West Virginia, it can work in your states. Because as Mark went through, we took it. We was not easy on it. We put it on routes. We told the drivers, we told the counties, put it where you want it. Put it to where, but make sure it passes your test, how it's going to work. And we did that. There was no stipulation of, we didn't cherry pick a route that it went on. We made sure that it went on routes that it was going to put it to the test. And we did just that. Our drivers, you know, when they first got it, myself included, was very skeptical about it. Going to a new vehicle that we have never been trained on, we didn't have any knowledge of. There's probably only, I'm going to say, 1,500, 2,000 electric vehicles in the whole state. You always have, when you go to a new industry, you always have individuals that just don't like it. And most people that just didn't like it had never seen it, didn't know anything about it, just going off what they've heard. We put those to the test, and we showed people that it can work. If you have the infrastructure, if you have the knowledge, the training, it can work, and it worked in our state. So we wanted to make sure, from the speaker standpoint and myself being a driver, that we actually got to the drivers. We wanted to make sure that they had firsthand knowledge. They were able to drive the bus. They were able to see how it worked. You know, no offense to directors out here, but my director don't even drive a school bus. He didn't know anything about it. So that was one way that we wanted to make sure that our counties was getting the best. And we did that, and we showed that it can work, and it does. You just have to make sure that once you properly train them, it does go forward, and it'll be fun.
And moving to Dr. Tom Williams with the Kanawha County, they were in the first round, as you saw. So they started, they were the second school to deploy a school bus in that first round, an electric school bus in West Virginia.
As Mark said earlier, we're the largest school district in West Virginia. We have approximately 900 square miles, 154 bus routes. We currently have 140 drivers. So our folks, why were we interested in doing a pilot? Well, the first reason, GreenPower's in our county. Actually, they're maybe 2 miles away from one of our 5 bus garages. We had it for six weeks, and they had some positives and they had some negatives. As everyone has said, some folks, you know, they don't like change. And so those folks, I call them beginners. They're against everything, and you just sort of have to go with the flow. But for the most part, our drivers liked the bus. They loved the braking. They loved the turning radius of the bus. It was a quiet, smooth ride. Our drivers and students both said that. We have rural areas in Kanawha County as well as what we consider urban. 50,000 is in Charleston, so to us that is urban. But our kids thoroughly enjoyed the quiet ride, the smooth ride, the non-diesel smell of the ride, the technology. We're a one-to-one technology in our county, and all of our kids have iPads, and so they're used to technology and doing things of that nature, and they really like the technology part of the bus. Actually, a lot of things that the drivers liked and our mechanics, it's very, very low maintenance. I mean, you have no oil, no antifreeze, no diesel. Very easy to maintain. Our mechanics appreciated that part of it. So it was just a good experience for our county. We ended up purchasing a bus. It was just an overall good experience. And like I said, the drivers who were uncomfortable with it at first, once they started driving the bus, they were able to turn over and actually endorse the bus after that. So you have to give things a chance. You have to change with the times, and so that's what we're trying to do in Kanawha County. And fortunately, we have GreenPower and our state backing us up to help us do that. So,
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We'll go to Dr. Miller. I became familiar with Barry after he started driving the bus in Calhoun County, which was the last round of the pilot. And he actually wrote an editorial in the paper, is how I met him, reading about something he wrote in the paper about driving the school bus. And so I think he brings an interesting perspective to today's discussion.
All right. Unlike Dr. Williams here, we're in the probably smallest school district or county in West Virginia. Just to let you know a little bit about our county, our biggest road is 2 lanes. We have a flashing light in the middle of town, and that's as big as it gets. That's what it is. So every route we have has a little 1-lane road that every driver has to go over. We've only got, I think we've got 14 full-time routes. So, you know, nothing massive here, but the first I heard of 20 years ago when I started driving bus, electric school buses weren't even on our radar. We weren't even close. And then we started hearing about they're coming, and it's like, well, I'm going to be retired before they ever get here. And then all of a sudden they're here, and I hear that they're going to build a plant to build school buses in Charleston, and I'm like, that's awesome, because that's good for everybody. And me being a school bus guy, we're going to have school buses built here. And GreenPower, I'd never heard of GreenPower, so I do what we do now. I went and looked them up on the internet, and I saw the beast, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. The bus we're building in West Virginia is this thing? This thing won't go in West Virginia. There's no way. You see it, the pictures up there. I said it'll drag everywhere. We won't be able to take it down our roads, and you know, we've got all these hills and all this stuff, and I'm like, I was disappointed. But at the same time, I look at the bus and say, boy, I'd really like to drive that thing once at least. And then I hear that we're having the pilot program, and I start emailing my director, and I emailed him so many times he got upset with me, but I'm like, hey, if we get one of those electric buses, I want to drive it. And okay, you will. And so he comes in one day and says, be here whatever day it was, we're going to deliver the bus, we're going to let you drive it. And it come in, and I looked at it, and I'm like, man, this thing's awesome. Too bad it won't work here. And we looked it over. So they let us drive it with the GreenPower people on the bus, and I took it down the main road, the 2-lane road, and I drove it, and I'm like, this is the best driving vehicle I ever had. I believe my exact words were, when I got in and put it in gear and put my foot on the pedal, was, holy crap, because it just went. There's no hesitation. It's just you put your foot down, it goes. And I drove it, and I'm like, man, this is aggravating. We got a bus this nice, and we can't run it in this county, because it still wasn't going to go down these little roads. I said, I parked my bus at the house. I said, I probably can't even get it in my driveway, because it's a pretty bad place. Don't look it until you start it. Once I started driving the bus, once we got it, the director said, take it. If you get hung up, we'll pull you out. That's why we've got it. Run it on your route. And it went everywhere we asked it to go. It made every turn we asked it to make. We have some pretty bad turnarounds where you turn around the bus and guys are like, we're not going to turn that bus there. They turned it there just as well they did their conventional. Go up a hill, the same as our diesel conventional buses would go up, and it done everything we wanted it to do. And you know, the heat, Mark has already mentioned. I myself drove it one day where I was running heat in the morning and air conditioning in the afternoon. That's just the weather we have, and it done it. People's like, well, you'll never make your route twice in that bus. And I said, well, I made it this morning running the heat, and I had 66% left over, so I think we're good, you know. So my only thing was, people say it'll not go in this county, and it did. It did what it was supposed to do. And I told my wife, after I drove it on my route a week, but I told my wife, I come home and I said, probably the dumbest thing I've done as a bus driver is drive that bus. And she said, why? And I said, because I want one now. And since I park at home, it's going to be difficult. But I will remind people we have 3-phase at our house. So anyway, all right, thank you.
So what are the 3 questions that everybody asks about electric bus? Doesn't matter what conference room you're in, what meeting room you're in, or anything else, people ask, how far will it go? How long does it take to charge? And what charger should I use? And I know that a lot of times I say I can't answer those questions in a conference room because I have to know more about the conditions of where you're putting a bus. And so that's what we can now start talking about. The conditions that you put the bus in. How far does it go? How long does it take to charge? And what charger should I use? And I really do believe that this pilot answered those questions, and answered those questions in a way that can be used anywhere in the country to be able to start looking at how you plan to deploy buses in your fleet.